Ed and I have been talking about this conference for quite a while now, and for it to actually be here today in front of all you great people, it's an absolute honor to be standing here and sharing some ideas. A couple thank yous on my end, to Ed, to Phil, Ollie, to Alan. Just amazing. Ed and I have been talking about this 2 years ago, that there's really no practical movement and skill acquisition conference whereby you actually can get up, you can hash out ideas, and it wasn't just a theoretical presentation on what can be very rough information at times, especially for coaches that are operating at the coalface. So to see this come about, let alone to have the honor, and I guess the fear as well of having to be the first person up, is fantastic. I have to look at some of our speakers, Rick and Mark and Keith in particular, Rob Gray tomorrow, Professor Newell. I mean, these are individuals that I have been studying for over a decade, learning about a lot of what I'm going to present today. So I think in terms of the company that I am with and you are with, it is absolutely, to echo Keen's point, phenomenal. World class. Be difficult to find a better group of individuals, and again, I'm so honored to be opening it up. And I'll have to tell Professor Dave, the fact that I'm going to put this triangle up here and I'm going to be the first person to present it today is a little tough, because I'll be honest, the individuals who are going to come after me probably know this information far better. But I'm excited to give you my perspective, because my perspective on everything with skill acquisition and coaching science has been born out of the trial and error of reading it in a book, having a conversation, going to conferences, but inevitably have to face my athletes, and inevitably having to face my athletes' results to see what actually works. So is everything that I'm going to say today going to be 100% effective in your environment? Probably not. But I think what's important to understand is, while we all might disagree on certain things, and hopefully agree on many others, a lot of that comes out of coming from a different context. So if I can impart one thing to back up Ed's point, is if you hear something that you disagree with, right, seek to understand rather than just pushing it to the side. Because it might be that works in a given context, and if following the question a little bit of translation follows, you could figure a way out how to nudge that information to work for you as well. And I hope you do that to me tonight. That if I present something that you disagree with or you don't understand, that even if we're midstream, stop me. Let's engage and let's open up with an echo of what Ed said this conversation and conference is about, which is just that, having good conversations about coaching. I'd like to say one final thing before we kick into the content. Our Irish national team obviously just won the Grand Slam, which I feel absolutely humbled to be a part of this great country, this great sport on that pathway. But we also have two amazing teams right now fighting the European Championship. Munster, in particular, I want to call out, because where we're standing today is where our Munster men practice, train for many, many years. They're full-time in Limerick, but many of them still train here. And I bring it up for one simple reason, that in watching Munster in particular, considering that we are in Cork, I've watched a team of people that are community-based, and they're hungry. They're hungry to win. And why do I share that? Very simple, because if you're here today, tonight and tomorrow, you're hungry to learn. And I think we are very much so in a perfect environment for which we can allow that hunger, hopefully that appetite, to be quenched with all this great information. So I had to bring up our Munster Red, because it's an important place that we're in. So with that, let me start with a couple ideas that I'd like to share with you guys tonight. First and foremost, I only want to talk for about 10 minutes. Probably will go to 15, but I'll do my best to keep it to 10. Ed told me I could talk about anything, but what I wanted to talk about is something that's relevant to where my headspace is at right now. And that is this idea, as the title suggests, of movement acquisition. Right? I typically call it skill acquisition, but we'll call it movement acquisition. I am a strength and conditioning coach by trade. That is what I do. I am not a skill coach insofar as a sport is concerned. Now that is in very important context, because a lot of what I'm going to say is bolted into a very important assumption, and that is that the skill acquisition work insofar as the sport is concerned is happening. Fundamentally then, I am always looking at the battery, right? We don't always see the battery. The kid plays with the toy. They have a lot of fun with the toy, but all of a sudden the toy stops working. What do? You go and check the battery. You go and check the engine. So a lot of the skill acquisition flavor that I'm going to be coming at, I think parallels what we do in skill or sport skill acquisition, but fundamentally it might be coming at it from a slightly different lens. Thus, I felt it was important, knowing the content of the next day and a half, to give you a bit of a constraint-led approach primer, which I know will be talked about quite a bit from my, and hopefully what will be a shared perspective. So to do that, let's begin with a bit of a conversation amongst yourselves. And I'm going to keep the time here tight. But what do you think of when you hear constraint-led approach? Now, before I let you go, you might think of nothing. You might think of a lot of things, right? Or your thoughts might be different than the person next to you or even mine. But let me give you, let's say, 60 seconds. Talk amongst the people around you. What do you think of when you hear or read constraint-led approach? 60 seconds, time is yours. Okay, go ahead and turn the volume down on them. So let's start with someone in this vicinity. Do you care to share one or two high-level points from your discussion? Someone in front of me. A constraint, if you would, yes.
So we talked about how you can manipulate the environment to get certain outcomes.
Okay.
For example, in football, if you're focusing on a session where you want to really get the players to switch play, you could use a 2-goal game.
Okay.
So goal that side, goal that side. So then you'll get the outcome.
So in football, since there's typically not 2 goals on the same side, that is a constraint in that you're manipulating, might we say, a rule of the game, in that case, to force or encourage a given outcome. Brilliant, okay? That's what one group thinks. Over here, say somewhere in this vicinity, anything to add to that?
I'd say being a learning architect, so
okay.
Not telling people what to do, using my drill design or my manipulation of the environment, etc., to get them to come to the answers themselves, as opposed to tell them the answers. So
we typically will contrast this, right, versus a telling versus a doing, sometimes called an explicit versus an implicit. And you're architecting in that you still have an outcome you want to see, but the pathway you get there is by manipulating some feature of the environment, waiting, if you would, for that light bulb moment to trigger, versus flipping the light bulb on yourself with language, let's say. Is that a fair reflection of what you said? Brilliant. Let's get one other contribution from this side of the room. Maybe something different. Say it again. Problem solving, right? So there's a certain level of complexity there. There might be, let's say, a decision to be had, and the complexity of that decision should somehow reflect this environment, this competitive forum we want them to be successful in. Brilliant, okay? So we've heard a lot of really nice things, and I think the definition I have up here will actually suffice everybody, right, or satisfy everybody. A constraint is a feature of our internal, and I don't want to mention that because I think we have to think how we think about things absolutely is a constraint for our sports psychologists in the room. So of our internal or external world that limits or restricts something from happening, right? So it's not like overspeed training, whereby if I have someone sprint and I pull them to try to physically pull them to run faster, that's not what a constraint is. It's almost the opposite. I'm trying to limit one thing so something else can happen. And even if you think of the physical form of the human body, right? We have 2 arms and 2 legs. We just as easily could have 4 arms and 4 legs. You could manipulate the physical design of our body, and in manipulating the constraints of our physical body, does that also change the kind of things that we can do with this body? 100% it does. Now, since we can't physically change our bodies in such a manner, what we do is we say, well, this is fairly fixed. but we probably can manipulate the environment or the thoughts in the person's head to encourage a new movement pattern, as I'm sure we'll hear said quite a few times, emerge, right? Anybody have a question or difficulty with this definition to begin with? Okay. Let's now take a moment and identify internal and external constraints that limit or shape our ability to move. So we heard 3 good answers. Let's take another 60 seconds and just think about, as we've defined it here, can you come up with some internal and external constraints that limit how the human body can move in sport or in life? 60 seconds, time is yours. Off you go.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
Give you another 30 seconds here, and I want you to consider this as part of your conversation. Why is it important for coaches to have an appreciation for how to apply the constraint-led approach? Why is this even important? Right? Because we're going to hear about it a lot. So now add that last little bit to your conversation. Why is it important for coaches to understand about constraints? Off you go. Why is it important? There. So let me probe the group here for a couple answers. Let's start with this lower corner here. What I'd like you to share is one of the reasons why you and your person you were speaking with felt that a constraint-led approach is important for coaches. Or maybe you don't know why, and that's fine as well. Anyone care to share? Learn. Okay, so give us a little bit more than that. So if learning is why it's important, how does it help with learning in your opinion then? Okay, and why would trying to develop self-directed learning be important? Yeah. And is it fair to say one of the most pragmatic reasons for that is that they have to play the sport by themselves? Absolutely. Let's get one other contribution over here. Why? Because we'll learn a lot about it, so I'm assuming that's why you're here. Why is it then important for us to know about these things that we call a constraint-led approach? Anybody new over here? Okay, I love that. Give us a little bit more what you mean by that.
Different learning styles, you know, we have different characteristic arms, so that you can give them some kind of attentional focus on or we just before different, you know.
Is it almost fair to say, to echo that, it's almost as if, let them show you what they know before you tell them what they need to learn, right? I remember when I first started coaching fundamental movement skills, again, strength coach here, sprinting, change of direction, crossover, all the single skills that us strength coaches like to develop. And that's what I used to do. I would teach them before I would let them teach me. And what I mean by letting them teach me is teach me how you move. What are your movement preferences? And again, as inevitably you learn about things like repetition without repetition and movement variability, the brilliant concepts that will be unpacked, you realize that no two people, let alone no two movements, let alone no two repetitions, are all alike. So if we put this constraint, we can't understand what sits, if you would, inside their own hard drive. Brilliant contribution. Thank you. I think so far we're all well aligned. Okay, so the train's out of the station now. What I'd like to do is tell you what's in my head when I think about a constraint-led approach. And these are some evolving ideas, and I want to give credit because he's not on the slide. A lot of the way that I'm visualizing this content comes from a friend of mine named Franz Bosch. Okay, and Franz Bosch talks about this area quite a bit, and some of these ideas are from him, but the graphics here are a bit novel. Okay, so we're going to see a triangle quite a bit. So I thought I'd be the first person to kick it off. And when we see this triangle, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about constraints from the dimension of 3 different areas, whereby the player themselves, their body, their psychology, limits what is physically possible. Right? Someone that is tall versus short, strong versus weak, mobile versus immobile, these are all features of the player's own constraints. We also know that there are constraints within a task. Am I sprinting? Am I changing direction? Right? Is it a specific movement scenario? Maybe I'm trying to put a shot on goal, but there's 2 goals, and there's various rules associated with my movement behavior. Right? These are all descriptions of the task, the thing that I am trying to do. And then fundamentally, there's also the physical environment. There's the weather. There's the surface. Is it inclined? Is it flat? Is it hard? Is it a 4G pitch? Or is it a wet, soggy muck outside when I'm trying to play and perform my sport? From our perspective today, we're going to keep it really simple of internal and external. Right? Player, that's all this stuff that's kind of inside of them. And external, that's the things I'm trying to do, what we're calling the task and the environment. It's an oversimplification just to keep the teaching very simple, but I still think authentic to the truth of the message. So when we see these ideas of a triangle, this is the way Franz Bosch has visualized it, and I really like it. And that is, there's certain things you can and cannot do with your body. Okay? So the things I can't do with my body are represented by some of those shaded areas. And then there's certain limitations with the task. It's not like, okay, go play. Go play what? Go play where? What am I trying to do? So the task has rules. It has features. It has constraints, right? So all the constraints of what I can't do are the areas shaded in. And then finally, you have the environment. Again, running up an incline versus flat. Trying to run fast on hard ground versus soft ground. Is it the same? I think not. Look at a stopwatch, right? And it will tell you it's not. Thus, the environment imposes constraints or limitations. That's the shade there. And then fundamentally, kind of what you have left is what you can do. And then the question becomes is what you have left, in terms of what you see them doing as a coach, are you happy with it? And if not, you got to figure out a way to help them sort it out. And thus, we start to manipulate constraints. Maybe I get them taller, and maybe I get them stronger. Maybe I improve their mobility. Maybe they keep wanting to drift to their left, so I put a constraint there. I don't let them go quite as wide. I play a small-sided game, if you would, right? Forcing a movement behavior that is different than the one they're currently adopting. But fundamentally, I start to impose these constraints on my athletes. Now, for me, this is typically where the conversation ends. And I want to unpack it one level further to show you how I apply this in a practical manner. So I think of this as having layers. Right? Each of these corners has some things that sit under it. And under the player layer, I have 3 different things I talk about. It's a mental model, we might call it a heuristic, a mental shorthand, if you would. And I talk about pattern, power, and position. By position, I'm not talking sport position. I'm literally meaning, can they get into the body positions from a mobility and a stability perspective to even perform these skills that are important to them? And power, I mean, how strong are they? How powerful are they? Their neuromuscular, their engine room characteristics. Can they even do this thing physically that we want them to do? And then finally, pattern, that's your coordination. That's your ability to tie all of this together into a cohesive skill, whether it be a movement skill or it be a sports skill. So when we take that triangle idea, again, the space here in each of these triangles, I could have quite a good pattern. I could have very low power. Right? I could have moderate ability to get in my positions. But as a strength coach, these are the 3 things we're constantly looking at. Can they perform the pattern? If not, why? Does it have anything to do with their power capabilities? If so, I can do something about that. Does it have anything to do with their positional, mobility, stability capacities? If so, I can do something about that. But if I know that position and power is just fine, and it just comes down to coordination, well, then I have to take them to driving school. Then it becomes about movement, skill, acquisition in that perspective. To do that, then, I need to know how I can manipulate an environment to change that pattern. For that, I'm going to flip to the external world. Right? When we talk about this external world, the task in the environment, which I'm lumping into one thing, I typically think of it as 3 different areas. I can manipulate the amount of space the movement is performed in. Right? If I know someone likes to do a lot of these looping movements versus cutting off their right leg, what do? I narrow the amount of space they have, so they have to be much firmer with that sidestep, if you would. So I can manipulate the space. The second I manipulate the space, it manipulates where that white triangle is in the middle, what they can actually do. I can manipulate the amount of time they have to perform the skill. One of the easiest things to get someone to run faster is to have them race someone faster than them. Right? We do it all the time, chase drills, to get guys and gals out of their own head and do a bit of racing. I can also slow it down. And then finally, we can manipulate the rules. I probably don't manipulate a lot of rules. Why? I'm not a sport coach. A lot of the things that I'm manipulating have to do with the space the movement takes place in and the amount of time. But that doesn't mean you can't learn something from the way I approach this. So finally, then, all of those amalgamate together, and we get this net, if you would, triangle up top that starts to show these 3 interacting pieces. So in final on this slide, all I want you to understand is you have to know what limits the body. That's the strength coach in me reminding many of you as sport coaches that sometimes you can't fix it necessarily just on the pitch. You need to look outside of it. But when it is just a pitch problem, movement skill development and sports skill development are very similar, and we have some tools in the task toolbox that we can manipulate to help that movement come to life. Okay? Any questions on this? Because you're going to see ad nauseum this triangle over and over again. Or is everyone happy with this? Okay. So, last couple pieces, then we're going to move. A strength coach perspective, real high level. Give them the physical competence to do the technical stuff and the technical competence to do the tactical stuff in that order, Kelvin Jones. Like, I love this because it's a poster, right, for strength and conditioning coaches that we need to still develop physical competency. And hopefully the narrative I gave you on the last slide reinforces why physical competency is so important. And individuals like Dr. Dave Collins and Anya McNamara, who are out there promoting fundamental skills and skill competency and skill literacy, it's so important. Because I've seen so many athletes that while they might be able to play their sport effectively, their lack of fundamental skills is born out of, as well, in association with their injuries. So we have to be able to bring that balance to life. So a couple principles then for me in applying this, strength coach perspective. Number 1, develop the 3 Ps, position, power, and pattern, in parallel to technical and tactical skill sets, prioritizing when a deficit in the former impacts the latter. Have a keen eye to know that when it's an internal problem. Have a keen eye to know when it's an engine room problem, and you're not going to be able to always fix it on the pitch, if you would. Okay? But do these things in parallel. Number 2, develop patterns in isolation. Yes, Ed, drill as a basis for building physical and mental competency and promoting recovery. There's massive benefit in performing single skills. I take it from a sports psychology perspective, that if I can get you comfortable in a basic marching and skipping pattern, one, there's some physical consequence, some physical benefit of doing that. But if I can start to inlay the basic cues of where I want your leg when it goes up, where I want it when it goes down, simple things like cup of tea on the knee, push off the ground, push tall, I start to lay in these cues, these simple focus points, while they're performing it in a simple environment. That way, when they go to the high-speed sprint, if you would, or the chase, I can now drop these cues in the bucket, and they already know what they mean. They already have confidence that they have scaffolded towards this end skill. So I bring this up because there is a bit of a war right now on drills as an isolated entity of the way you develop people's skills versus a constraint-led approach. And this is a case where you can have the cake and eat it too. It's all about a continuum of development. And again, from the strength coach, one of them hopefully in the room, I can tell you physical competency has to be there for the technical, tactical side of life to thrive in some capacity. And then 3, when developing movement skills, embed the skill in context, ensuring the decision-making is as specific as the movement. Ensuring the decision-making is as specific as the movement. So while I do warm-up drills, absolutely, we'll show some of them today, it is important to understand that 70% of the movement skill sessions I run are embedded in some kind of reactionary, decision-based model. typically in a one-on-one type scenario. So the more often I can develop the pattern, the movement skills, with the associated decision tagged to it, 100%, that's the way I want to approach it. But I also work with elite individuals at what they do. If I was working with far younger individuals, I might start with a bit more of a blended approach. Seeing, as the gentleman over here said, let them teach me when they're ready for something a bit more complex. And in final here, I have a checklist of sorts that tells me, from a strength and conditioning perspective, about how specific something is. In strength and conditioning, we always talk about, is it going to transfer to the field? And inevitably, if we talk about, is it going to transfer to the field, we're talking about specificity of training. And I have this rule of 6, if you would, to understand if something is specific. Number 1, am I developing it in the context it actually needs to be performed in? Right? So in that regard, a back squat is not a specific task for, let's say, ball handling or passing, because I'm not squatting in the context of pass and catch, right? 2, is the pattern the same? Again, the squat is not the same as a sprint. So while they're related, I can't say that it checks the pattern box. Is the range of motion in some way similar? Okay, I can say that the range of motion possibly of a squat is somehow similar to a sprint in this case. Amount of force, okay, well, the amount of force one generates in a squat, if it's a heavy enough squat, is probably well above the amount of force that they have to generate in a sprint. Okay, I'll buy that. Rate of force, no way. A squat is significantly slower than a sprint. Direction of force, no way. A squat is all vertical, whereas a sprint is a balance of both. So, backing up here, if I was trying to look at how specific a squat is to sprinting, I can really only say that range of motion, insofar as acceleration is concerned, and amount of force, possibly, those are the only 2 things that stack it up. So is it a specific exercise? No, it's not. Is it a relevant one? Yeah, it is. Because if I need a little bit more force production, a squat happens to be a pretty good way to increase my surplus of force. But if I want to say something is specific, it's going to transfer to the pitch in the context I want it performed in, that I need to definitely have number 1 and number 2 checked off. And typically for me, I need at least 2 more. So I'm looking at 4 out of 6 of these. If I can get 4 out of 6, I'm usually saying this is something specific. If it's 3 out of 6, 2 out of 6, 1 out of 6, then I'm using the term relevant. And this is just strength and conditioning jargon, but I think it's important to understand that specificity lives on a continuum. And sometimes we're trying to plug in to work on just one of these areas. But considering this is a skill development and movement development conference, I want to be clear that most of what I do checks all 6 of these, because in my opinion, that is what needs to happen if you want to see transfer to the pitch. At the end of the day, you only get better at that with which you practice. Thus, we have to practice in a specific environment. Okay? Good. That's it on the presentation side. Are there any questions? I went over that fairly quickly. I'll share the slides, that's no problem. But are there any questions? I just wanted to give you a flash of my headspace right now as a strength and conditioning coach, giving you some of the mental models that I operate off of. Are there any questions?
Nick?
Yes.
I get how you might manipulate physical environment.
Yes.
Most definitely, from what you're saying. I'm less sure about what you mean by an internal constraint.
Okay.
Could you talk just a little bit about how you might work with an internal constraint?
Brilliant. In fact, it's funny because that is, by the way I define it, what my own PhD work is on, and I'm kind of staying away from that today, so I'm glad you brought it up. Here's what I mean by an internal constraint, okay? On one hand, we talked about these inside the body, these physical constraints, and you said you get them. The strength, the power, the mobility, stability, brilliant. So we'll put those aside, that you're comfortable with. From a mindset perspective, it very much so is what they are thinking about when they go into the task, okay? So on one hand, we have what we call their attentional focus. So I'm using my sprint example. I'm doing a sprint On one hand, I could have a coach that's very technical, right? Like a sprint coach oftentimes is, that says, hey, I need you to extend your knee, or I need you to be a little bit stiffer in your foot as you come off the blocks, right? These are fair cues that someone might give. So these would be an internal focus point. I'm actually focusing on my ankle. I'm focusing on my knee, okay? Alternatively, I could tell them to explode off the blocks. Or I could give them an analogy. Hey, I want you to get out of the blocks like a cheetah is 1 foot behind you. So all I've done now is I've changed their focus from something about the body to focusing on the environment. But by switching that focus is how you can manipulate fundamentally the constraint inside of their headspace. Does that make sense?
I would say that's about you knowing you're an athlete.
100% it is.
I think some athletes perform very well technically,
Yeah.
while some could respond better to an internal stimulus, such as, and I've written one
Yeah.
word down here, how imaginative are you
Yes.
in getting those cues?
But still, to the point then we're saying the same thing. It is a playground for which you can try different things as a coach. Just as a coach could try a larger space, a smaller space, change other dynamics of the rules, I think it would be equal to the point you're actually making for a coach to be dynamic in how they're helping their players or athletes find the focus point or focus points that work best for them. And I think that's an important piece sometimes that's not lost on purpose. But if all we ever talk about was what we can manipulate in the environment, and we don't realize that an unhealthy focus, right, or an inappropriate focus for the task could actually be working against what otherwise would be a very good scenario here, we want to get those to align. That we bring about the right focus so they get the most out of this scenario that we have prepared for them to solve, if you would. Is that a fair answer?
Yeah, it really fires my imagination because I keep thinking of perception. Is my perception of that movement could be totally different.
Absolutely.
To the way the athlete is perceiving.
100%.
And I think actually that you could be trying a constraint-based approach, but in actual fact, the athlete has no idea. They don't have that perception. So you really have to go at it in a different way.
This is brilliant. This is brilliant because that's exactly why if we just curate scenarios and we don't treat, right, the actual agent, the athlete who's going through that scenario with some level of unpacking in terms of their attentional focus, then bang on. They could be literally attacking this scenario with a mindset that is completely counterproductive to what it is meant to encourage. Because just because you put a constraint-led scenario in front of them doesn't mean they're going to be able to solve it. If my son can solve a 4-piece puzzle, I probably could give him a 6-piece puzzle. But if I give him the 100-piece puzzle, even though there's an opportunity to solve it, he probably doesn't have the mental faculties or the know-how to solve it. So we really have to balance the constraints that are outside the body, what I call the external, and the constraints that are inside the body, which are the physical as well as the mental. On a break, I'd love to share a few books that you may not have heard of that'll help you unpack that if you want to feed your imagination. Good. Okay. I'm going to pause it there. Can I have the people that were happy to be my volunteers now step up and they can pop off their jacket? We'll go for about 20-25 minutes here, and I'll just grab the ball. And what I want to do is very organically, and let me say, please, if you have a phone and you want to film any of these scenarios, these drills that we're going to go through, by all means, please do, because they're not online anywhere. What's your name? Pork. Nick, pleasure to meet you. Okay? So let's give Pork a round of applause, make him feel good about volunteering. Alan as well. So, typically in my world, I will run 45-minute movement skill acquisition, or what I just call simply movement development sessions with both our 7s as well as various 15s, right? With our national team, various provinces, this, that, and the other. And what I want to go through today is the model that I typically use, okay? A lot of my work in a former life was around linear speed development and sprinting. But I'm actually going to stay away from that because I know a lot of you work in likely team sports of some type. And even if you don't, agility usually is of some interest to everyone in the sporting community. Thus, we're going to talk about agility development. Now, when we talk about agility development, it's important that there's been a little bit of a restructuring of the definitions of agility. Funny enough, if you chuck agility into Google, all you get is these dog race courses, right? So Google actually takes the word agility and applies it to dog courses more so than human development of something that we might call change of direction. So when I think of agility, I think of it as two things. Your ability to change direction, just full stop, and your ability to change direction under some kind of context. Said differently, you have to make a decision before you move. So when I run these sessions, they try to be about as close to 100% reactive decision-based as possible. Okay? And I'm going to go through the various scenarios that we take the players through pretty quickly, which is why I encourage you to video. I can't show you everything, but I'm going to try to talk through everything. So the first thing that we do is what's called scrap and stretch. Okay? So our coaches constantly talk about scraps, right? Winning the 50-50s, a loose ball, right? A ball in the air. So all we do to begin with is we simply will put scraps to each other. Let's try not to hit anyone. Alan, go and kick it back. Kick it, yeah, right? And we'll simply start nice and close, a little bit of hand-eye coordination. That's it. And we'll do this for about 60 seconds, real close. And then, I'm a strength coach, so we got to do some kind of stretching. We'll do about 60 seconds of some kind of stretching. I don't need to get into that today. Then what we'll do is we'll get a little bit farther away from each other, and all we'll start to do is move the ball a bit more side to side. Right, so all we're trying to get them to do is move their feet just a touch, good hands, nice and easy, again for 60 seconds. When that's done, we'll go back to doing our different stretches. We just work our way around the hip, around the upper body, and then finally we'll allow them to open well up, right? They'll get 15, 20 meters, some of the guys farther than that, and they'll start to go aerial with the ball. Now, I'm not going to attempt to kick it to the ceiling, but they'll start to go aerial with the ball. There we go. Get them moving side to side. The players love having the ball in hand. Do you think there's any sad faces when we start a session like that? Absolutely not. I get what I want. Hand-eye, a little bit of cognitive switch on, side to side, forward and back, up and down. Everything that I would program, this, it's all right there by those simple prompts. Okay, so that's 6 minutes of scraps and stretch. Okay, we like to call it that. People have a lot of fun, and so far it hasn't done us wrong. From there then, I run warm-ups different every single time. I think if you are a sport coach that runs warm-ups, you need to have core elements, and you need to have your game day warm-up 100%. But insofar as the week is concerned, I change things up all the time. Why? I change it up because if they don't know if it's going to be a straight line, a circle, or something completely tangential to that, what do they have to do upstairs? They've got to stay switched on. They've got to stay listening. They have to make sure that they're adopting the right focus, and we're having that two-way conversation. So what we'll typically do is create a massive circle with 40-some players. So we'll pretend that we're in a circle, okay? And this first part of the session, and you guys can just mirror me to begin with, is what we call our priming, okay? Now this would be your classical agility type work, but for me, I think we take a little bit of a spin on classical agility. And that is, with this, we're typically embedding a defensive mindset from our rugby players' perspective. When we talk about tackling in rugby, and this comes from Faz, Andy Farrell, our head defensive coach with the national team, he talks about go, load, go. And it's something all of our rugby coaches talk about. Your ability to accelerate, collect your feet, and then make that final decision into the contact space, whether it's a tackle or even a ruck type entry. Okay? So it's this paddling of the feet that whether you're breaking down to make a tackle or really you're breaking down in any sport, that oftentimes players can struggle with. So this paddling, which I call rapid response, is what we're going to consider the base level of this first drill. We're going to build from the base. Okay? So I'm going to show you a couple examples. You guys literally mirror me. So we have our feet together, set position. Okay? Initially, it's just the drills in place. And I'll explain why that is in a second. When I say go, we simply split the earth. Yeah, go. When I give you a second go call, all I want to see you do is a 2-inch run right in place. Go. And we're just nice and easy, paddling and relax. Okay? So that can be base level 1. We typically don't start with that. That's what I would do with little kids who've never done this before. So you guys rest. What we'll do here is here, they can paddle, they can move side to side, they can rotate, right? They can switch. It doesn't matter what it is. So anything that I can do with my feet alternating or in tandem, we call that the base level. Okay? Everyone happy with that? From a base level, we then introduce an exit. Okay? I'm going through these quickly because I want to get to the reactive pieces. The exit is a secondary movement. So I can come down, I can paddle, and the exit can be out the top. That's an acceleration. An exit we'll use, this is why we do a circle in the middle of the pitch, so we can move anywhere. We'll do an exit out the back. We'll do an exit to our right. We'll do an exit to our left. So once the players understand that base level context, now look what I'm doing. I have back and forth, I have side to side, and I have rotational movement built out of my ability to decelerate, move my feet quickly. So there's a physical readiness piece to this, but there's also function to the task of having them do. From that, we can build in what I call a base plus. And in rugby, a base plus is anything you just saw plus, right, hit the deck. That's what we mean by the plus. For us, again, when we talk about rugby all the time, it is the specificity and the lack of functional practice of getting off the deck effectively, chasing one's feet, and from that chase of the feet, being able to go forward, left, right, or move to anything behind me. So we add in that plus, and immediately we're working off the deck. Finally, we can do the base, the exit, the base plus the exit. That's with nobody else. But inevitably, my sessions at this point always have what we call the stimulus, okay? So, Cork, I'm going to have you stay there for a minute. Alan, you're going to be in front of me. So with this stimulus now, we'll go off of I'm the leader, right? You're the follower. So we can do it as follows. So we're standing up straight. I drop, right? I back up. I drop. Once I'm here, we're live. So I could just do this mirroring, or what inevitably we do is we add in what? We add in the exits, okay? So if I'm here and I'm sprinting, he's on the chase. They continue to chase until I blow the whistle to stop, okay? And once they get a certain distance, guys will start to dance around a little bit. It'll turn into a bit more open field movement. Equally so, we're here, and I take that step forward, he's immediately trying to respond back. Now, as a strength and conditioning coach, I want to plug this very important fact in. Again, I'm not a sport coach. The sport coach is working on the technical, tactical features of their game. And typically, they're working on those specific outcomes, what we might call the ends, my ability to pass, my ability to catch, the final steps before I go into contact, right? The actual body position before I clear out a ruck. But how often do they have the time to go through all of the footwork, all of the movement skills that connect those scenarios? Not very often. So we're constantly having conversations with our rugby coaches around the lines our players take into a ruck, right? The lines they take from an attacking perspective, their ability to evade. Do they always go to the left or right? What tools do they have in their toolbox? So as a strength and conditioning coach, by choice, not chance, I'm trying to build in saturated opportunities for my players to get good at one important thing that stands true for all movement skill development, and that is reading body behavior. I want to give them saturated opportunities where they can start to detect when someone's going to move left, when someone's going to move right, forward, back, up, and down, and do that embedded in the movement skills I would be developing anyhow. So for me, it makes no difference. I'm developing the physical competency. But if I can do it where now I'm getting better at reading contextually relevant behavior, that's going to start to make a difference on how they deploy those skills when they're with our sport coaches. Okay, so again, we could be here, we're moving side to side, in whatever direction I go, we put a chase on it. And then the final piece is, I can now, as the leader, put in the plus, right? So when I hit the deck, you hit the deck, right? Beautiful. Now I could just continue to go off the deck, or I could pop up and immediately go one direction versus another. Sometimes I dictate where the leader has to go, which means you know where, you just don't know when. Other times, I don't dictate where or when, giving them some choice. So if I summarize here, and this is just the primer, this is 6 minutes after our 6 minutes of scrap and stretch. We have our base network here. This is our ability just to control an athletic body. Side to side, forward and back, rotating. Think of it as three-dimensional. From there, I can add in my exits. Forward, side to side, back. I can put a plus ahead of that exit. In our case, that's hitting the deck, coming back up. And then I can go through that entire sequence with some kind of stimulus, which for me, if you come to my sessions, is that entire 6 to 7 minutes, okay? So we have scraps and stretch, we have our primer, both of which, if run correctly, could have 100% reactive and or decision-making element imposed right within it, okay? Any questions so far? Okay, component now, number 3, is what you might call properly the movement skill development portion. Now, when we think about, you can relax, y'all, you're ready to go. That's good. Cork, we might have you step in here. I don't want Alan popping anything. He gets a little too excited. This is kind of like a runway, though, isn't it, Alan? You're thinking about walking all the way down. I'll let that one sink in there. That little model joke there. When we think about movement skill development, we think of it as a tree. Not a family tree, a movement tree. And when I think about this movement tree, 3 different things come to mind. I can move again linearly, I can move laterally, or I can move in a rotational fashion. And I can perform these movements in a given instant in time, a distinct motion, or I can use them to track, right, where I use it for a longer period of time. Let me explain what I mean by that. So when it comes to linear, I can move linear forward, which means I can accelerate, and if I keep going, inevitably into absolute speed, running as fast as I can. So linearly, I can go from gear 1 to gear 5. But also linearly, I might have to stop, right? I have to decelerate. Equally, I could go backwards in a linear fashion, so I could backpedal, but I also might have to decelerate before coming back forward. So I have these 2 motions. I have my acceleration and absolute speed. I have my backpedal, and the bookends of that are my ability to decelerate. Laterally, I have my ability to shuffle. That's kind of the lateral equivalent of accelerating, isn't it? It's a continuous motion, typically used for tracking. Don't use it as a primary form of movement unless you play basketball, let's say. But also in a lateral sense, like a deceleration, I can actually cut in any direction. So in my lateral segment, I have shuffling, and I have cutting of any variety. And then finally, I have rotation. Well, oftentimes if I'm tracking, it's with the intention that I'm going to cross over and accelerate. So we call that a rotational shift or a transition. I could also be backpedaling. Think of American football, defensive back, and I might have to drop step to put a chase on. Or think of a kick chase in rugby. I'm backpedaling, I see it's over, I have to shift and go. So we have these rotational or these transitional movements. Why do I share this? Because as a strength coach, I use that as my code. Right? That's my DNA of a movement session. And that I want to understand the linear, lateral, and rotational attributes. And I want to understand how those things get glued together to make their sport. I want to understand what are the ends a coach is trying to achieve, and what are the movement means, so to speak, to achieve that. So what you're now going to go through very, very briefly with me is how we do that in a very, very simple decision-making context, whereby Pork and I will have a series of movements where you're mirroring, right? So you're the defender, I'm the attacker, where if I'm going this way, you're going backwards. And if I'm going here, you're going forwards. And we're simply just starting to respond to one another a little bit faster. Keep a space, keep 2 meters, right? Good. And we just start to move forward and back. Now, could I do that without the reaction? Sure. All day long, we could go forward and back, and we do that at times. But once they know how to do that, I'm happy with their body positions, we can start there. We might call that the base level of the drill. So if I give a first whistle, that starts it. But now, if I give a second whistle, we both have to sprint. And on the sprint, you have to turn and go, and I got to put a chase on you. So whistle 1, we're moving, right? Whistle 2, you have to react, sprint, and I'm simply trying to put a tag on him by a given distance. Now, in that case, it's pure reaction. There's no decision-making going on. That's fine. So we can go from the reactive version to the decision version, okay? Whereby first whistle starts the drill, second whistle, it's open. So, I'm the attacker, first whistle goes, and what am I encouraging the players to do? We're encouraging them, well, we ask them what they do, and inevitably, what do they tell us? We're staring right through the center of the body. And we encourage them to keep their vision there and see, as they're moving forward and back, in the 10 seconds less than I'm going to give them, can they get a read on this person? Are they weaker off one side than the other? And then when I blow the second whistle, can you use that? And when we come back in and have a chat, our guys lucid, our gals lucid of being able to do that, right? So we're forward and back, first whistle, second whistle, right? And then we're just simply seeing how quickly they can move around. Our channels are 7 meters, typically to 10 meters wide. Typically the channel then is about 10 meters long. And from that, we simply have them work around, and based on how much sprinting we want to have them do, some days that's where it ends. I get past you and it's over. Other days we have to continue to sprint for another 20 meters. So if I need to top up that high-speed running, this is still a perfect forum for me to get the physical development right within it. That's our linear package. What about lateral? Lateral is the exact same idea, right? One, if we're in the middle of the field, we can just ad hoc on this where we're throwing this back and forth, right? And whoever gets it on the whistle, they become the live individual. So all of these are up for games based on where you position them on the pitch to bring in a bit more of a live sense to this. But if we're working side to side, you're simply going to mirror me. So I'm here, I'm just simply working all I can. And again, when we hear the whistle, first round, it could just be a sprint out of this to get them going. But for most of them, the second whistle is we're moving side to side. I'm seeing if I can bait you. I hear the second whistle, then I'm trying to go. Good step. Right? And now we start to bring in that decision making. Now the final piece is trying to open this up for them, where it's a single whistle and it's open from the very beginning, whereby give them a bit of space. It's one whistle, one reaction. So typically you're 10 meters out, I'm 10 meters out. We hear the whistle and now it's live. We're just coming in, right? And we just want to see how good from an attacking perspective can they put that step? Can they put that delay? Can they bait? What we call fix the defender and finish. But inevitably, all of this is working towards their ability in a one-on-one scenario to have incredible evasion and incredible tracking. Forward and back context, side-to-side context, and then an open context whereby you mirror me, I'm here, but I just don't know I'm moving you at an angle. Keep hearing me? I'm moving you at an angle, right? Now I'm moving at an angle. And we literally create an open forum, almost like kids in a park playing tag. And we have our equivalent of duck, duck, goose, where we put them in 20 by 20s, we're passing the ball around, and when the whistle goes, whoever has the ball and the whistle, I'm trying to put a tag on you guys. If you step out of bounds, that's 10 press-ups. If I get nobody, that's 10 press-ups for me. We can manipulate how many kids are in the game, and immediately, just like the straps and stretch, we can utilize two-hand XL, which our coaches always want to see their ability to move with ball in hand, and can they use that to drive straight and make a touch? Right, so we start to add in these decision features. But the key thing that I want to impress upon everyone is the movement tree. Straight ahead, side to side, and rotational. Base level ability to perform those single skills, into ability to do those under reactive conditions, into their ability to do it in a one-on-one scenario from a defensive perspective, an attacking perspective, live if you would. And on the day, the coaches will give us the latitude of how much physical contact they will allow. Obviously, the more we know the defender can step in and wrap, the more live the actual drill becomes. But that's the tough thing about rugby. We can't go full contact all the time. Thus, one of the key features, one of the key elements of context that you need in skill acquisition in rugby, you cannot do it every day. And as a strength coach, they definitely don't give us first dibs on doing it in our movement skill sessions, right? But it's a fact of life and something we deal with, okay? The final piece, and then we'll take questions. Now, we don't have enough individuals, but if I could just get 2 more people to pop up here just to stand, I'm not going to do anything physical. 2 more people. All you can jump in, can whoever. Nothing physical here. Good. Let me get one more. Yeah, go ahead, just jump in, one more. So a very, very simple thing. We always finish with rugby, though. And the guys know if it's rugby, it means ball in hand. What I'm always trying to finish with in some capacity is a 3-on-2 type of scenario. So this is one scenario that we'll use, right? Where basically there's 10 meters behind you, there's 10 meters in front, 20 meters wide. You're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Very simple. I call out 2 numbers, right? So if I call out 2 and 3, port all, you run back towards the screen. Go ahead, nice and easy. Oh, so 2 and 4. Well, I'm the guy that drove down 2.5 hours, my head's fried. Okay, 2 and 4, brilliant. 3 of you come forward. I'll I'll simply, I might go with the scraps, I put the ball on the ground, and the second you get to your 10-meter line, what are we doing? We're turning around, and we're now in a 3-on-2 environment. Now, ball in hand, you should always win with the ball. But do the guys always win with the ball? No, they don't always win because they don't find the space. So what we're trying to do in this instance is simply give them high-speed opportunities to find space, but when they don't find the space, can they create it from a movement skill perspective? Okay? So we'll use that 5 line, we'll call out 2 numbers, 10 meters, they sprint, then it's a live 3-on-2 with a certain level of physical contact that the coaches are happy with. The other one we'll do is we'll go, this is the last one more person over here, we'll go 3 across, 3 across. We'd all have a ball, so you'd have a ball, we'd have a ball. We're simply passing it back and forth to one another, right? Nice and easy. Yeah, we're just staying in our line. You guys would have one as well. You're right there 5 meters off the try line. And when the whistle goes, whoever has the ball on the defensive side has to sprint past the try line, put the ball down. It creates an immediate 3-on-2 scenario. So we're trying to get the ball right back to the middle, attack where the space is. Now, if we have 3 forwards against 3 backs, they're going to have speed to get back in and create a 3-on-3 scenario. So this one is a bit more of a volatile drill because it starts out for a brief instant as 3-on-2, but pretty quickly, based on the speed and the finesse of the defense, can become a 3-on-3 scenario. So widening and narrowing this gives us some opportunities to have a bit more footwork involved and not just go ball in hand and score the try. Okay? But we always try to finish with 5-6 minutes. So we have the scraps and stretch. We have your basic primer, you have your movement skill install piece, and then if you would, we download and we run it on the hard drive for the final 5-6 minutes. Okay? Thank you. Give them a round of applause for volunteering. Thank you guys. So that's all I've got. I appreciate everyone's time. It was fast and furious, but again, my whole thesis here was to give you a vision of a strength and conditioning coach's mindset who just so happens to have spent over 10 years studying skill acquisition and trying to apply it in an athletic development context. So thank you guys very much for your attention and time.
Okay, Nick, thank you so much. I have a mic for a reason because I think it's very important that we can hear other people. So if there's someone talking down here, that the guys at the other end. First off, thank you so much, Nick, because I know the time pressure that you're under at the moment. Nick, just while throwing it into the mix of working with the RFU, he's also writing a book at the moment. So I know you're deep in that space. So thank you so much for the time that you've given us. Questions? This is the time we want to dig deep. And we want to...
Wait for a second.
Yes, great. So wait now and everyone can hear. That's a lot of exercise for me.
Sure. Hello. Thanks very much, Nick. That was great.
Cheers.
Just looking at a position-specific perspective, so how would you differentiate between certain positions? Because obviously a winger might have to hit a certain amount of sprints compared to a prop.
Yep. So there's, in terms of the physical development piece, obviously most of that is going to be reserved for how we manage, if you would, their workloads and their exposures in practice. Obviously that's one route for it because that's the natural context of those skills being developed. Obviously in the weight room as well, usually that's at an individual level, but it just so happens that backs versus forwards have different individual needs in terms of that position and that power piece to use the physical development. Insofar as the skill development is concerned, it really is based on time. For most of our teams, if they can get 30 to 45 minutes of proper movement skill development as a single session, usually that is going to be all-encompassing, where we're working on the basic patterns that everyone needs. We all need to have effective footwork into the tackle space. We all need to have effective footwork into the contact space. Our backs, granted, might have to do a bit more arced type running, a bit more high-speed exposure. Most of that is going to be born out of training itself. Now, the second we go to 2 sessions a week, then we might start getting a bit more specific. Definitely when I worked in American football, the positions of, let's say, a lineman and a wide receiver were so different from one another, we had to run position-specific movement skill development. But in rugby, there is so much overlap insofar as the physical skills are concerned. Rightly or wrongly, mind you, I'm only 2 years into the sport, Most of those sessions are a bit more homogeneous insofar as the fundamental skills we're working on. Because while the backs can still benefit from footwork and sidestepping and what we call their evasion toolbox, can our forwards benefit from it? Oh my, you better believe they can. I can name 10 different forwards now that I know over the last 2 years have been doing this work and are brave enough and able to actually perform, take a sidestep, take a soft shoulder, punch through a few more meters because of their confidence in their ability to move. So in that case, you might say a back is the evasive animal, forward needs to pound through the front. We've almost taken a different approach. Everyone technically can go ball in hand and can move if they feel comfortable and the coaches feel comfortable with them doing so, and that's kind of been our movement skill thesis right now. So I don't think I've given you the answer you want, but that's the answer I have.
Anyone else? Next? Yeah.
I suppose just applying that setup in a big group or a team environment, knowing that then how can you identify that learning is taking place? Do you know when you're working with big numbers?
Yeah, that's all I work with. So sorry, what's the question?
Sorry, like, you know, so if you're working, doing what you did there, but
Yep.
doing it in a team environment
Yep.
where you can't observe all the players all the time.
We use one thing for that when we're in the team environment, right? And we call that a waterfall start. So a waterfall start, well, one is I break them into enough groups. Let's say I try to get them broken up into 10. So there's 10 pods, if you would, all the way down. Now that 10 pod might have 3 or 4 guys in it, but trying to get that to 10 pods, that way I'm not running all the way up and down the pitch to get my vision right. But we'll use a waterfall start. So let's say it's that reactive drill that we did where they're forward, they're back, they're forward, they're back, second whistle, it's live. Well, in that instance, I can get a snapshot from both an attacking and a defensive perspective, what's going on there before I blow the next whistle and start the next group. If I'm honest, when I'm running these movement skill sessions, especially with the various 15s groups, we typically have 2 to 3 other coaches who are there with us. So typically I have a trail person that is cueing right as I'm going down. And if I see something, I might yell it out, but we're trying to actually use coaches as well. It's usually not 1 on 40. But when it is, that's what you're doing. Waterfall start, you get a 30-second snapshot to either say, check the box, keep doing this, right? That's your confirmation, or you chuck in your correction. Hey, on your next repetition, I want you to focus on that. Now, you might say, well, Nick, I can't talk to every single person. That's not a problem at all. When you get down that line of 10 pods, you bring them back in on that water break. You say, okay, boys or ladies, this is what I saw. What did you feel? What did you see? We can install then what I call a global cue that generally helps everybody. I would then try to have the hand on the shoulder conversation in the breaks with people I really think are struggling, drip feeding that over maybe multiple sessions to get to everybody. But once they're at a certain level, I have them co-coach. So I use what I call 30-second clarity breaks all the time. Talk to your partner. What's one thing you're doing right now that you're happy with, that you want to exploit? What's one thing you feel you can do 1% better? Right? And those conversations just get them thinking, get them reflecting. Then I might call in a random group and say, what did your partner say? Imagine their faces the first time I did that. They're like, I wasn't listening. You play a team sport, you weren't listening to the person that just told you an intimate idea about how they could get better. Right? So there's also some learning involved in that. So there's the waterfall start, there's the partner coaching, and on that waterfall start, there's kind of the reflect and share, giving a global cue back to everybody. Those are 3 or 4 different things that I do. Okay? It's not easy though, it's not perfect, but coaching isn't.
Okay, unless there's a really pressing question, we're going to try and get us back on time because we're going to be able to use our breakout session after Mark to maybe throw out some questions to the mini groups to ask, you know, because I've got some questions for sure that I might just throw out to the general and say, this is what I was thinking during Nick's talk. What do the groups throw back? So unless there's anything pressing, are we happy to wrap with Nick? Yeah? Okay, so thank you very much, Nick. Very much.